it just goes to show, doesn't it, that we are now getting headlines about protecting nature. And it's the kind of thing that we would have dreamed of 6 months ago. You know, all of the newspapers, even those newspapers that we can't rely on very much to report accurately on nature, are now in the business of saying, hey, we need to protect nature because it's blindingly obvious that our health is reliant on the health of everybody on the planet, which in turn is reliant on the health of nature. So now it's blindingly obvious, it's right up there in the headlines. And yet normally, these are the kind of things we would be discussing and working out how to take forward and the challenges and communication ahead of those at these big meetings. But of course we can't, so we're doing it in this great thing. And this is the first global meeting with these kinds of numbers and with this kind of scope to make advantage, dare I say it, of this opportunity and take on the challenge. So this is a real sort of groundbreaking moment that we can actually do this. We're going to be joined by Marco shortly when he comes in. He's not here yet, and maybe I'm not surprised. He's a busy man, Director General of the WWF. There's always an influential position globally, always very busy, and I would think now with COVID-19, he really does have his hands full. His next big project is a new deal for nature and people. And one of the questions I want to ask him, it was always a new deal for nature. And now, of course, it's become a new deal for nature and people. You know, we really are in some sense of revolutionary steps at the moment. And this is a terrible disease that's happened. It's changed all of our lives. And when we go back to some version of the new normal, whatever we're gonna call it, it's bound to be different. It can't possibly be the same. And we've got three main principles, haven't we? We need to protect what biodiversity we have. We need to restore what's been lost. And then we need to reset our values so we don't find ourselves in this situation again. And there's no excuse to do it. And in fact, we really don't have any option. It's science that will provide the short-term vaccine and the treatments to hopefully get us out of this situation and mean that we can live healthier. But it's us looking after biodiversity that will provide the long-term lasting solutions. The only true vaccine against future pandemics is to protect nature. So we've never been in such a, I say those of us who are at the front line of conservation, whether we're field scientists or NGOs or funders or supporters or communicators of all kinds, we've never been in such an influential position in history. And what are we going to do with it? That's my question to the people in the 60 countries. What are we going to do with it? How do we reset those values? It seems to me that the people that are trying to jumpstart the economy have got the bigger headlines, because they are the ones that are saying we need to do anything possible to jumpstart the economy so we can get your jobs back. And of course, you know, if we're in that situation when we're bumping along the bottom and struggling, maybe even lost jobs, maybe even been sick with the COVID-19, we'll do anything to get our jobs back, even if that means undoing some of the environmental and health controls. So it's a scary time, and it's down to us now to help reset those values and hopefully start new with genuine new values. So that's my little bit. And luckily, the great man, Marco Lambertini, is in. I've just pressed his admit button, and here he is. Hey, Marco. We just let him connect his audio.
Hey.
Hey, Marco. How are you, sir?
I'm good. You got an amazing backdrop.
What do you think? I tell you, this has been my work here, and in fact, I got some internal criticism because the banner up here, I made it really bright so no one could forget. But I heard that on some people's television screens, it was actually resonating. It was too bright red or something. It was a terrible thing. Well, Marco, it's great to see you again. So just so everybody knows, Marco and I, we bump into each other in Gland or these grand events all over the world that we're used to. That's how we operate, isn't it? We go to, a UN meeting, we might go to a World Conservation Congress, we might go to Our Oceans, we go, all of these meetings that are our essential waypoints in progress. They really are our lighthouses as we travel through the rough waters. How are we going? Where's the challenges? Have we got the right language? The corridor meetings, and I love them. We're all learning new techniques and we've become sort of semi-professional Zoomers. But the last time I saw the great man Marco, we were in Gland at World Economic Forum together. We had a good natter between events. And the one thing that you said to me, Marco, and it's really stuck, we spoke about E.O. Wilson, Half Earth. And you said, we're already there. Marco said to me, we're already there and we should be giving glorious prizes to global leaders who don't lose any more biodiversity. And I tell you, Marco, we were at the bottom of those stairs with a cup of tea together. Well, I think you had coffee, I had tea, Italian and English. And I still remember you saying those words. So without taking any more of your time, Marco, we've got loads of questions for you stacking up here already.
Right.
It gives me great pleasure to hand the floor to you, Marco. And if you share your screen, your images will pop up. And when you're done, just clear screen share and we can have a natter.
Yep. Can you see my screen?
Brilliant.
Super. Paul, first of all, thank you so much for this opportunity. It's great, and anything you do is turning out to be magical. So I'm sure this one will be the same. Everyone listening, this is an opportunity to talk about perhaps the biggest challenge, but also the biggest opportunity that we have in front of us as humanity. And I'm going to warn you, I'm going to start by presenting some figures that I'm sure many of you will be familiar with, that will break your heart and concern you very deeply if you love nature, biodiversity, and if you care for the future of the planet and our society. But hopefully later on, I will spark some hope and optimism about also the opportunities that we have in front of us. Are we reaching a turning point for the planet? Many scientists are calling the age we're living in the Anthropocene, the age of humans. The age of dinosaurs under 1 million years ago. Now this is the age dominated by us, and we know why. This is about what, again, scientists call the great acceleration, something that has happened just in the last few decades, an exponential acceleration of the uses of any type of natural resources, from energy to timber, fish, fertilizers, of course, the use of fertilizers, the use of pesticides. Everything has been exponentially growing over the last few decades, like never before. And we know that it's unsustainable. In fact, in all this bad news, perhaps the best news is that today we know exactly what's happening to the planet. We know exactly what the issues are. And frankly, we know exactly most of the solution too. And we're beginning also to understand the consequences of what's happening, so that what's happening to the planet, it's pretty much around everybody's knowledge now. This is a graph that shows the global warming of the atmosphere over the last several decades, and it's pretty clear that all this is correlated to our activities. We know that this is having impact on a number of ecosystems globally, from melting poles to creating also pollution that affects the air we breathe, and increasingly so in our megalopolis. We're seeing incredible images on TV and media of our home on fire, the unprecedented massive fires from Russia to the Amazon to Australia and Africa and so many other regions. And all this driven by the way we consume. We consume particularly 5 main commodities: beef, top of the list, soy, palm oil, timber, and rubber. We also know that this is not happening only to the atmosphere, but it's happening to the ocean too. And the water temperature of the ocean has been warming as much. In fact, it's been buffering the warming of the atmosphere by absorbing a lot of the heat. And as a consequence, in some cases, in some places, heat waves underwater are happening as much as above water. And these heat waves are killing animals like corals that are actually already adapted to very high temperatures, but they can't withstand this particular exceptional heat waves. And you can see here the magic view of a healthy coral will ghostly bleach to death. And then the plastic that we're throwing into environment and the ocean. And clearly, from an economic perspective, all this translates into costs for us. And then there is the last addition to these heartbreaking kind of graphs and considerations, which is around the risks to our health, the threats to our health. And the fact that over the last several decades, we have seen an incredible exponential increase of zoonotic diseases transmitted by animals, particularly wild animals. And all this connected to the increased exposure of ourselves to wild animals, either through consuming them legally or illegally, or by deforesting and pushing ourselves and wild animals in closer contact. Now, nature, we know, is resilient and is clearly also able to fight back. But the data today also about biodiversity, what we are celebrating this week, is quite discouraging. First of all, the number of species that are on the brink of extinction has been accelerating over the last, again, few decades in particular, reaching the famous million species threatened with extinction that the report of the UN publicized last year. In 40 years, 60% of the wildlife population, so this is not species, this is actually individuals of wildlife, has disappeared from the face of the planet. A steep decline in just 40 years, half of the life of an average human person. And if you look at the ocean, the fish stocks, the commercial fisheries, and the decline in the commercial fisheries has been equally very, very heavy. Only 10% of the overall global commercial fisheries are actually in a healthy state. So, heading towards now the solution and the action. If the state of the planet continues to go down, and if the pressures, because of our activities, will continue to go up, the response is also emerging and growing. Perhaps most exciting of all is the clean energy revolution. The investment, the investment in clean energy that actually brought now the price of solar and wind power competitive with the cheaper and dirtiest of all fossil fuel, the coal. And so we're really heading towards a true revolution. We're not going as fast as we would like, as we all know that, but we're definitely moving in the right direction. And then the challenge of living in harmony with nature, which is, by the way, the mission of my organization, is actually becoming now the mission for the whole world. And the challenge and the opportunity of living in harmony with nature has never been more relevant. To put it simply, we have two challenges in front of us: stabilizing the climate and stabilizing, in fact, reversing the loss of nature. And bending these two curves, climate change, the CO2 emissions, the CO2 equivalent emissions, and the decline of biodiversity is the challenge of today. Reversing those curves is our job today. In order to do that, it's quite clear that we have to do particularly three things: move to clean energy, growing food in a sustainable way, and in order to support clean energy and sustainable food, moving the subsidies and the investment, financial flows, towards sustainable ways of producing energy and producing food. And we also need the cultural revolution, a revolution that puts nature at the center of our society, that values nature, that stop taking nature for granted, and they identify and recognize the risks and the opportunities, the risk of losing nature and the opportunity of conserving it. And when we look at biodiversity in particular, we need to always look at it, and nature in general, with two different lenses, if you like. If you look at this picture, it tells me two things. First one is, I have to say, the amazing diversity of life, the forms, the behaviors, the colors, the shapes of biodiversity on our planet. So the awe and the inspiration that nature gives us. But on the other hand, it also gives me the clear indication that actually nature is not just beautiful, but is also indispensable for us. And this is about the services that even a cricket like this, a grasshopper like this, gives to us every day for free through, in this case, pollination, but so many other services that nature and ecosystem and biodiversity provide to us every day for free. And they're so fundamental for our society, for our economy, for our health, for our happiness. So what we need is a new deal for nature and people, as we call it in WWF, a Paris moment for nature, a commitment of the world to preserve nature that is equal to the one that we had agreed to stabilize climate. We have an opportunity to do that through this UN convention in 2020. Of course, this is now being postponed to 2021. And so the super year for nature is next year. We call it a new deal for nature and people. And we need to achieve three main goals. Conserve half of the planet in natural state. As Paul said at the beginning, we already lost half of the natural spaces on the planet. And we need to hang on to what's left, and we need to start recovering. We're advocating for a 30% protection of the current natural places remaining on land and in the ocean, and a 20% on sustainable management. So management means a good way to extract the resources without destroying the ecosystem. Second, we need to stop the extinction and the decline of wildlife, and that's absolutely critical too, because a forest is not just a patch of green, it's actually a complex system of millions and millions of species and hundreds of millions of billions of individuals that all together make the forest a living and productive ecosystem. And thirdly, perhaps the trickiest but the most important one is halve our footprint by 2030, particularly looking at the 5 key sectors that are today the drivers of nature loss: agriculture, fishing, infrastructure, forestry, and extractives. Those are today driving nature loss and climate change, and we should reform them and green them in a way that they are delivering their economic outputs in a sustainable way, not at the cost of the environment. It is possible, and clean energy, the shift to clean energy is a classic example of that. So all this for a clear, simple vision. We need to achieve a carbon neutral, therefore stabilizing climate, and a nature positive, therefore stopping losing nature and begin to recover what we lost, society by 2030 and 2050. This is the imperative for us to fulfill our moral responsibility to coexist with so many other life forms on the planet, but also, frankly, this is our best insurance policy for a safe future for all of us. Nature and people are interconnected more than ever, and anything that hurts nature will hurt people at the end, and vice versa. So this beautiful convergence of the two agendas push us to achieve a new deal for nature and people in 2021. And in WWF, we're convinced that together with all of you listening today and so many others, institutions and individuals around the world, we can make this possible and happen. Thank you very much. Thank you, Paul. Back to you.
Hey, wow, Marco, thank you so much. So a tour de force and exactly what was needed at this time. Could you swap your screen sharing back to whatever?
Yeah.
Super. Here we are. Thanks very much. Well, Marco, such is the influence of your appearance that since you came on, we have had large numbers extra large numbers joining from the UK, Switzerland, US, Brazil, Canada, Germany, Japan, Mozambique, India, and Spain. So there you go. There's a sense of your influence there, Marco.
Not sure about that. It's more you and this great initiative.
We're already in 60-something countries. So there's a lot of questions here for you, Marco. The first is tourism, ecotourism. You know, we all understand that ecotourism model works well in many places when it's well managed. Great examples. During this moment, COVID-19, where there's nothing coming into these people, and some communities are struggling, which of course exposes the protected areas and the resources and the species that they're looking after. What can we do short term, sort of like, and the question is now?
Yeah, it's a great question because it's a true problem that very few people actually appreciate in many places around the world, but particularly in Africa. This is really serious. So many national parks and reserves and communities depend on tourism for their livelihoods and for protection of these places. And so we're seeing a spike in poaching, and we're seeing a spiking also in, for example, collection of firewood, which is unfortunately driven by people, local communities losing jobs and livelihoods. So it's terrible. What can we do? Two things. First of all, what we're doing is actually pushing very hard governments and multilateral agencies, for example, the African Development Bank, we're in discussion with them, to really support the sector of tourism in Africa and prioritize the sector for all these stimulus packages and recovery packages that governments and multilateral agencies are discussing. That's really super important because this sector needs actual cash injection now to maintain its viability for the future. So that's really important and perhaps the most effective way to really support this sector. And then, of course, as soon as we will be able to visit these places again, let's support these places and perhaps prioritize our travel and our trips towards natural places rather than other type of tourism.
Fantastic, Marco. Great advice. And I've got one more here, but just to follow up from my side of that first question, is there anything that people can do who would normally have traveled to say great areas, you know, to see gorillas, for instance, or, you know, elephants, or these wonderful rhinos we say, and they were going to spend this much money this year going, but they're not going to spend it if the effect of COVID hasn't hit them too much? Even if they don't spend the 2,000 getting to see the gorillas, is there a way that it can be computed that the people looking after those gorillas will have got 400? And can we send them 400?
Paul, that's a brilliant idea. And I think we should actually set up a fund like this, a voluntary fund to continue to support, particularly to pay the salaries of the rangers and the other local people that work in these businesses. I take your idea on, and I'll discuss this with our leaders around the world.
Let's do it, Marco. It's an honor for you to join us, and personally, thanks so much. It's always enlightening and great fun to see you again. So hopefully we'll see each other in person soon.
Likewise, Paul. All the best, and thank you so much for everybody watching.
Take it easy, Marco. Thank you very much. Travel well.
Bye-bye. Bye.
Thank you.